Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trulia, and I'm going to talk about, in response to some reasons to apostatize from Orthodoxy that Ben from, and I just need to plug in Ancient Insights, formerly Ancient Insights. Now he is a Roman Catholic, and I just want to say, broadly speaking, it's tragic when anyone apostatizes. We have to realize, even if someone's an online character, we're dealing with real people. We need to be respectful about that. We also don't know a lot about people's personal situations, even when people think they do. I'm accused all sorts of things, even from family members, which aren't true. So I'm not going to begin to imagine why, he became Roman Catholic. I always say, evidently, there seems to be a large intellectual difference. It's not just purely intellectual, but whatever personal reasons there are, that's for him to talk about if he wishes to. In the end, we don't know at the end of the day. Ben was someone who I've had on my channel. I've had his articles on my blog. Someone I supported because he was very intelligent and a very just genuine and nice person, I found him. And so to kind of see his change in attitude to become very snarky is surprising, because it just wasn't what he was like. He didn't reach out to people that he was otherwise in contact with a lot when he was Orthodox, at least in the online world, like Seraphim Hamilton and myself. So took us by surprise, and the change in attitude took us by surprise. It's also surprising that if someone was struggling with something, this wouldn't be something that they would reach out to some resources about. I trust that he did so in the real world with his parish priest and stuff. And, I would have been happy to help if it was something I was asked. And I feel bad because I think he feels personally betrayed by me due to just looking at the tone of the things he's written and otherwise ghosting me and stuff like that. But it's, that's disappointing. I have no ill will towards him, and I wish him the best. Of course, I pray that he returns to Orthodoxy more than anything. He's daily in my prayers, but it's disappointing because I expected more from him if he were to leave Orthodoxy, to have sort of different reasonings than what he has, which is why I don't feel he really gave Orthodoxy a shot per se, because he would have reached out to Seraphim Hamilton. He would have reached out to myself. He would have been reading Orthodox resources instead of Roman Catholic resources and try to discern these things. It seems he's been pretty dead set in becoming Roman Catholic at the exclusion of Orthodox resources. And so that's surprising. That gets into personal stuff. We can't guess about personal stuff. And so I'm in this going to discuss what he actually does talk about for his reasons to remain Roman Catholic, which I will share on screen. And we will base our critique on what he really says, because, what else would we do? Right? That makes the most sense. We have a comment here. Nice bookshelf. It's not a real bookshelf. I have a curtain behind me, and I'm too cheap and busy to buy a bookshelf to put my books in my new house. And so my brother told me to put a background up, so you could blame him for the fake bookshelf. But there you go. It's not even a green screen. It's a blue curtain behind my head. So there you go. So anyway, I was joking. There we go. See, I take things very literally. And we have J.A. saying hello. Hi, guys. Hi. So we have from Facebook his reasons to stay Roman Catholic. And it starts, my comments start at the word, let's see, likewise. So I'm just going to Control F likewise here, because that's really where we get the meat of his critique. And I'll just start talking about it. I will say, to his credit, Bennett's been mostly private. He's not really been trying to make the rounds on apologetics channels, which he could very easily do. And I appreciate that. He's discerning things where he's been argumentative. He's done so through a sock puppet. So it's almost like a thought experiment of sorts, I guess. He could speak to that. And so I guess we can be grateful that he hasn't allowed himself to be turned into the like token Orthodox apologist who's become Roman Catholic. My props to him for that. When Joshua Shoup being apostatized, he obviously did not do that. He's kind of made hay of being the insider and all that. And Ben has kept a lower profile, and I think that's wise. He was told that in Notre Dame, he divulged in his blog that like they need people with open minds if they want to get graduate work done. They're not people that think they know everything and are going to act as experts. And so that's what he appears to be doing. Despite our disagreements, I'll give him props for that. And I don't think he'll be silent forever. He's too intelligent for that. But I do think when he becomes more active, he's going to have better reasons, what we see here, because I think these reasons are really not very compelling. So anyway, we see on his Facebook post something private, so which is why I feel at liberty to read it. He's pretty much defending in the wake of the blessing of gay couples in the Roman Catholic Church, why he will not abandon Roman Catholicism no matter what, is pretty much what it's about. And so the critique of orthodoxy begins here. He says, likewise, the Eastern Orthodox must abandon the biblical and patristic teaching on the filioque. Like he's giving his reasons why he won't revert to orthodoxy, which we pray that he does. And so he begins with this. He must abandon the biblical and patristic teaching on the filioque, which is a very surprising and surface level critique. It might be something you would get from, I forget the name of that guy, the Scholastic Answers guy and stuff like that, where they'll claim that East and West taught the filioque, which like most Roman Catholic apologists don't do, right? They'll say at least the West taught the filioque and the East didn't or something. He seems to be taking the totally opposite approach. To be fair, I take the opposite approach against the filioque, but I'll just start with the biblical, right? The creed without the filioque is literally a quotation from scripture. So to claim that the East Orthodox have to forfeit the biblical teaching on pneumatology, yes, Christian Wagner is his name. There we go. So anyway, that the biblical view of pneumatology is just incorrect, right? It very plainly gives just what we have in the creed, which is without the filioque. It requires a lot of inferences to try to draw a eternal manifestation, not eternal, I'd say hypostatic causation view. They're going to take clips of that. Sorry, guys. A hypostatic causation view of the filioque. Because, right, like when we see the Spirit proceed from the Son, it's in the sense of mission, right? In the sense of to mankind. We see this in the book of Revelation, right? With the water in the new heaven and the new earth. And, right, that, the grace being given to man, this is something that's not eternal in the strictest sense of hypostatic causation in the scriptures, we're saying, okay? And so I just find that very strange, says the Eastern Orthodox have to abandon that. If he's going to give a typological, sort of really high-minded biblical argument in favor of it, I'd say the book of Revelation, actually, if you cross it with the book of Exodus, works very much against this. If you look at the placement of the lampstands and significance of this in the tabernacle, because the lampstand represents the Holy Spirit. There's 7 flames, and we know from the book of Revelation that's the Holy Spirit. It actually works against the idea that the Son is hypostatic cause of the Spirit. So you can't even get into the high-flying biblical stuff, which Ben's very good at, and really seriously argue for the filioque, in my opinion. So as for the patristic teaching, I already said, most people are going to say they're half and half. I don't take that view. Ben doesn't take that view. For what it's worth, when Ben and I debated each other on this in the blogs, clearly I ended up on top because he ended with personal insults. It's essentially saying I refuted myself because and stuff like that, but not actually addressing the arguments where I bring the receipts and where I show that he's making assumptions and not interpreting Augustine's On the Trinity, for example, from what it actually says in On the Trinity. So it's something where I feel he's forfeited both, but this is his conviction. I obviously disagree with his conviction on this point. So we have this, that the Eastern Orthodox must abandon, right? He claims the biblical patristic view of the filioque. We have supposedly on papal primacy, which is just not true. my book, Rise and Fall of the Papacy, goes into a lot of detail. Okay. I don't know how big it'll be on the screen, but it goes into a lot of detail on how consensus-based ecclesiology is from the scriptures. It's from really, it's an advancement of Judaism, and it could be found in all the early church documents going into really the 9th century. Okay. So that link is below if you want the details. And the sad thing is, there would have been a time where he would have just got this book for free from me, right? If this is something he's struggling with, I would have said, here's my rough draft. Please read it if this will help you. And it's something where he did purchase Eric Ybarra's book and read that book. Maybe he didn't pay for it, actually. We just know that he read it. So he's trying to get the side from the Roman Catholic side, but when he was Orthodox, he really wasn't trying to get the best Orthodox case, which is disappointing. We have Christian Mario saying, Ben and I used to chat a lot. He actually played a major role in me acquiring into Holy Orthodoxy. And this is why I disagree with, no offense to anybody, that he really was Roman Catholic all along or something. I think Ben was a very genuine person. And I also think he's come to an obvious change of heart. I don't think it's purely based on the evidence, sadly. So that is something that I believe, but then again, only Ben really knows. And I would really call to question papal primacy being biblical or patristic, in all honesty. Now, he says that the Orthodox lack the patristic biblical teaching of predestination and grace, which is kind of bizarre. I'm going to guess there's a Calvinist streak he's talking about, a hyper-Augustinian streak, because most fathers, East and West, really have a view that squares very much with St. John Chrysostom. And so I'm kind of surprised to read that, but be that as it may, that's something maybe you'd have to explain more than this comment. I would say if you're not into harmonizing the fathers, you want to say, well, the Augustinians were diametrically opposed to John Cassian, to be fair to them. Guys like St. Prosper of Aquitaine viewed themselves as that way. Now, later Orthodox writers like St. Photius didn't view them at variance. But that being said, it's like, at least, all right, I could see that. But then that goes back to like the filioque question. East and West were different, not that one was the full patristic teaching, one wasn't. It's just it's an overly strong accusation. Again, not surprising from a new convert, but surprising from someone who I would say is a more careful thinker than what we're seeing as of late, right? Ben's too smart a guy to me, just to really mean this transparently. It's kind of strange to me. And then he speaks of remarriage after divorce. The Eastern Orthodox reject the biblical and patristic teaching, which is, again, very strange. The Bible explicitly allows for divorce in cases of sexual immorality. The Western Church, not only like we've seen, I otherwise don't recommend the blog, but on Shameless Orthodoxy, there's Western canons on divorce. The Western Church had divorce. There's the Frankish theologians. You can read this Catholic Encyclopedia. They had Frankish councils that had divorce. But I'd say most convincingly, let me just take a sip of water. There's a canon in St. Basil on repeated marriages, which is interpreted to be permitting divorce. And there's no doubt that the West accepted this canon because it's in the canons of Dionysius Exiguus. So we have explicit canons on divorce in the West. We have a canon that the East has permitted to be interpreted about divorce, accepted by the West. It just seems to me like, how could you really be arguing this? Eric Ybarra, I know, told me a few years ago now, because we don't talk anymore, that I now appreciate the canonical inheritance of divorce. And Ubi Patras has a quote mine, I think, on remarriage and divorce, which is pretty good in this case because it conforms to everything I've read. And I'm otherwise not a fan of quote mines. But to be fair, I'm not a fan of divorce. So I really don't like this being an apologetic thing against the Roman Catholics. To be fair, divorce is a sin. You'll probably go to hell. In my opinion, like, you really, really, really have to repent. It is a mortal sin. So it's not something where I'm looking to justify at all. It's something people shouldn't even be thinking about. It's a very evil sin. And, but so is killing people in war, and that's why there's penance for it. That's why some authorities like St. Apostatize had lifetime excommunications for that. So there's things that the church has degrees of economia about which are evil, right? It's not an endorsement of the evil practice. It's how do we heal this person that, for example, apostatized. Yes, there's canons on apostasy. And so these are things that the church deals with because the church is a hospital of souls. It's not an endorsement that these things are good because, of course, it's not good. So we have someone's here. I dig the sports shirt with the fake bookshelf. Awesome. Now, this is Buffalo Bills. They're playing today in the playoffs. If you're a Bills fan, you'd understand you have to appreciate the Bills when they're in the playoffs. It doesn't happen very often. It goes many years, many years without playoffs. So that is something very important to me. In fact, I'll be doing an interview tonight, which will make me miss probably an hour of that game. So that really stinks. But what are we going to do? Anyway, back to Ben. And so anyway, to bring his reply back, we were talking about remarriage and divorce. Now, Ben continues, there's no consistent Eastern Orthodox teaching on sacramental theology or ecclesiastical authority. And again, he's too smart for this, right? I understand like the common Joe Blow that's just passively taking in information would seriously think that, because there's a lot of people with, very publicly giving different opinions and fighting very strongly about it. So I'm going to continue reading his comments. He says, this is why no one can agree whether Baptist converts who weren't rebaptized after receiving only one immersion, which is invalid according to even Father Daniel Sazoyev, are really members of the church, and why no one can agree on which post-schism councils are actually conscience binding, so much for ecclesiastical indefectibility, right? So this is his critique here. What's baptism, what's not, what are the post-schism councils? Again, Ben just knows too much to really be saying this. And ultimately, it's a self-eviscerating sort of critique. So I can tell you, I have a whole video with Ben, Orthodox Magisterium. I got a whole video on the issue of baptism, the canons. I view these things pretty clearly. And I don't see, I think the sides I think they're against each other are less against each other than they think. I think it's emotions that are getting in the way. But to make the critique he just made is self-eviscerating. Why? Because was the Roman Catholic Church correct when it disallowed for Mormon and just Jehovah's Witness baptism, or when it allowed them? Right? Are they correct or incorrect? We go, oh, well, they're Gnostics. Well, how about when St. Stephen of Rome allowed for Marcionite baptism? St. Augustine even talks about allowing for Marcionite baptisms. In fact, we got a canon on that. So that you can't say, well, they're just too crazy, because that's not the answer. We have a change in what the Roman Catholic Church accepted as baptism in the last 125 years or so. All right, so who's correct? Wait, but Ben just said that makes Eastern Orthodox a non-starter. So then by the same logic, is Roman Catholicism a non-starter? He's too smart for this. He knows this. So that's why this is strange. Now, are the Ukrainian Uniates correct in saying the Pope cannot bind them on the question of homosexual couple blessing or not? Right? We could see that from Metropolitan Shevchuk of the Ukrainian Uniates. Says we have our own canon law. We're not bound to this. But wait a second. The Pope gave a positive teaching on what blessings could do. Technically, right? Isn't he infallible and have direct jurisdiction on these questions? He says no. Well, wait a second. Then we don't know what's binding. Then doesn't that call into question Roman Catholicism? I mean, of course it doesn't. It just means people disagree. That's my point. But this is a self-eviscerating critique, right? If we're going to be OCD that any existence of disagreement means no one can know what's true about anything, then it applies to Roman Catholicism. We got to be big kids about this stuff. I mean, this stuff is pretty obvious. So let's continue, again, about the ramifications of this critique that Ben gives. I could see that Ben would, like any Roman Catholic, will try to reconcile these things or identify the wrong party. Well, this difference of opinion doesn't matter because that side's wrong. I mean, of course, Orthodox could do that too, right? We could reconcile things too. In fact, why don't you do the same mental gymnastics that you could use to reconcile Roman Catholic stuff to reconcile Orthodox stuff? So it's just, again, it's self-eviscerating. Now, the council question is also absurdly self-eviscerating, because where is the Roman Catholic Church's list of infallible ecumenical councils? Where's an infallible list of ecumenical councils? Doesn't exist. Why did Roman Catholic manuscripts call Florence the Eighth Ecumenical Council? I thought Leon II was an ecumenical council, right? Like, aren't there other Roman Catholic ecumenical councils before then? But not according to people who went to Florence. They called it the Eighth Council. So that sounds like this wasn't settled. I mean, you know, was there centuries of doubt over what was an ecumenical council between Nicaea II and Florence in the West? Why didn't they know? I mean, this is a good question if we're going to apply his critique to the Roman Catholic side, right? If it's a serious critique. My point is the critique just fails. It's just not a good critique. But how about the Melkites? You know, I'm gonna quote a Melkite source, all right, where it says, I'm not going to share the screen because it's too much. It says, while the first 7 ecumenical councils enjoy a place of prominence, especially in the East, both the churches of the East and the West have experienced local councils and synods throughout their rich histories. And if you read the rest of the website, it even talks about that. It calls the post-schism ecumenical councils in Roman Catholicism, it calls them general councils. So, right, so why are the Melkites not clear that what the ecumenical councils are? Right? Why does Eric Ybarra in his apologetics say, I can accept Constantinople 879 AD as an ecumenical council? That sounds like you don't know what the ecumenical council is, that this is debatable. So if this is a critique that Eric Ybarra wouldn't make, why does Ben do it? Ben's smart enough. He knows this. It's just, it's bizarre. I mean, and to a point that gets the Orthodox, Ben himself had a list of binding Orthodox councils. He has them on his blog today. So it's a strange critique. It's disappointing. He made it. He knows better. But what can I tell you? This could respond to what he wrote. I don't know why he wrote it. Ben claims that all the major Eastern Orthodox patriarchates have embraced some form of heresy, whether that be approving of contraception. And I'm going to take these one at a time. So he claims that, oh, well, we have synods that accept contraception, which again, synods have accepted all sorts of heresies. So I think like that's not really that compelling. But the point is, Roman Catholicism accepts contraception. Now, Amoris Laetitia, for example, says a pastor cannot feel that it is enough simply to apply moral laws to those living in irregular situations as if they were stones to throw at people's lives. This should bespeak the close heart of one used to hiding behind the church's teachings, sitting on the chair of Moses and judging them with superiority and superficiality, difficult cases and wounded families. Along these lines, the International Theological Commission has noted that natural law may not be presented as an already established set of rules that impose themselves a priori on the moral subject. Rather, it is a source of objective inspiration for the deeply personal process of making decisions. Right? And so what's an application of this? What Pope Francis said, Zika virus could use contraception. So, right? So you have the Pope saying that. You have the Roman Catholic Church accepting that, well, we could have these situations where using contraception, to quote Pope Francis, is not an absolute evil, right? Especially you have Zika virus is the example being used. So why wouldn't we be charitable to the Orthodox synods that allow it and say, well, it's not absolute evil for this in that case, right? It's the same sort of mental mind games, right? Whether or not it's right or wrong, that's not the video about it's wrong. I believe the church has been very clear on contraception being wrong. But the point is, we have liberals in Eastern Orthodoxy, just like there's liberals in Roman Catholicism. And so they use that as a weapon to smack the Orthodox. Is just, again, disingenuous, especially with what has come out the last few years within Roman Catholicism. It's just a bizarre critique, in my opinion. Now, interestingly, he says some form of heresy, the Eastern Orthodox, including ecumenism. I mean, Roman Catholics aren't in the World Council of Churches, but they have all sorts of ecumenist meetings. They flat out pray in mosque and kiss Qurans and stuff. So it's, again, a very bizarre critique. This is kind of like the Roman Catholic attempt at accusing us of clown masses, right? Like, I don't use those critiques because they're stupid. We have all sorts of people doing stupid things. I'm not going to point my finger at every stupid thing that happens in Roman Catholicism because we got stupid stuff. Got a whole video about this. Is Orthodoxy a bigger mess than Roman Catholicism? We've got a mess too, right? But like the point in ecumenism, when this is a way bigger problem, Roman Catholicism is strange. Now, intercommunion speaks of misinformation. I hear this a lot in Orthodox circles. There's intercommunion with the Oriental Orthodox. This is what Ben is referring to. This is not true. There is an agreement that shifts jurisdictions. If a Oriental Orthodox bishop is in town, that now becomes under jurisdiction of Oriental Orthodox bishop. When Eastern Orthodox bishops in town, vice versa. I'm not saying I like this agreement. Mount Athos wrote against this agreement. A lot of people don't like it. Father Zoif, who's a saint, doesn't like it. But that's not intercommunion. That'd be essentially like when Pope Francis says you can't evangelize Eastern Orthodox lands, right? You know, you're letting them have their jurisdiction. Or it'd be like actually giving up jurisdiction somewhere in a deal. Things like that happen in history. So it's not intercommunion. There's no concelebration officially with the episcopacy of the Oriental Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox. Just like there's uniates intercommuning with Eastern Orthodox in Ukraine. I mean, that is happening. There's no doubt about it. That is not an official intercommunion. We don't have it among the episcopacy. There's always rogue priests doing rogue stuff. I'm sure there's Roman Catholic priests communing Protestants and atheists and all sorts of stuff. So this is nothing new, and it's a again, a kind of strange critique. He should really know better. So that being said, we'll continue. He says, Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology has no principled reason why this doesn't require lay faithful to renounce communion with their patriarchs. I really don't know what he's getting at here. I know it's like the first, second council as a canon on this. Is he taught? Is he leading said maybe? Right. I would say, like, even to be fair to the old calendarist, right, the true Orthodox and what they call themselves, like, I don't invest myself that heavily in this stuff because I'm like, I'm just a layman. I'm not gonna. I've got opinions. I'm not going to judge the bishops and them being perfect in every respect. Because you just don't find that in history. You find even the saint that was perfect in every question, in every respect, when you have all their writings. Like, you just don't find that stuff. So it's like, I'm not going to put myself to schism because I don't see utter perfection in my jurisdiction or something like that. But it sounds like he's accusing us for being bad for not doing that, which is like, then why don't Roman Catholics do that? Why do they become said? Maybe he's leaning that way. I got no clue. I'm going to guess not, but it's a bizarre comment. I'm not quite sure what he's getting at there. If an Eastern Orthodox Christian really cannot be Catholic because it would entail sharing the communion of heretics, then they ought to seek out their local trail park to find one genuine Orthodox sect that's in schism with the Greek Orthodox sect in the trail park across from them. And again, the kind of snarky comment, we could see the new Ben here, could be made about the trailer park said monastery or whatever, right? Like that, they got that too. So I really just don't know what he's getting at here. It almost applies like he knows there's like a lack of theological perfection in Roman Catholicism, which we're going to see essentially is going to concede and do a 180 in this thing. But I'm sure that's what's running in his mind, at least about that question. So anyway, let's continue. We see in the Catholic Church, I have the sacraments. All right. I'd say that's questionable because saints like Augustine say that the schismatics don't have the Holy Spirit, right, in their baptism, right? You have the form of sacraments. I'm not going to say you have sacraments, while your church says we do have valid sacraments. So that's, again, a strange critique, given that this is in a critique. But here, I guess, I suppose, is a defense of the Roman Catholic Church. He says they have a consistent sacramental theology, which we just discussed is actually not true because they've changed on the question of Mormon Jehovah's Witness baptisms, for example. They've changed on whether effusing a baby is mortal sin or not, right? Like Thomas Aquinas said. So they've had changes too. It's, again, very bizarre. He knows better than this, but I don't know why he's saying this. He says they have the traditional doctrines of justification, which, again, I would say the Orthodox doctrine is actually more scriptural and patristic. The Roman Catholic doctrine, I actually would say, is good. It's actually very formulated, but it's in response to Protestantism and the worst ideas of Protestantism. So it's really not traditional. It's kind of like the synthesis of traditional ideas and to apply to a new heresy. So I don't know why that's a swipe against Orthodox. It's kind of bizarre. He claims they have apostolic succession, and I say yes, as much as the Anglicans. I'm not going to take that away from them. transubstantiation, and I'd say just not far enough, right? Ben and I talked during COVID, and we actually came to this kind of shared view where the Eucharist doesn't make you sick, but it could. God could let you get sick if he wants you to. He has his reasons, and sometimes there's no rhyme and reason. Sometimes there's people less sinful than other people, and the less sinful people get sick, the more sinful people don't. God has his reasons. We don't judge God, right? And so we kind of came to this shared view, Ben and I. You can see it in my blog during the COVID times. But in the Roman Catholic Church, they teach no, the accidents means you could get sick from the accidents. That's why they have gluten-free Eucharist, which is really only a very bizarre outlier thing in Finland in the Orthodox Church, and may actually ultimately lead to their excommunication. I wouldn't hold my breath in that, but it's not a view that's big in Orthodoxy. Even the Greeks are against it, and they're considered liberal. And so, in a sense, I would say the Orthodox have the higher view of the Eucharist, the more patristic view of the Eucharist, than the Roman Catholics have almost the overly philosophical view, to the point where it's not the medicine of immortality because of the accidents, and sorry, it's the medicine of immortality, even if we're going to allow for transubstantiation and its categories of thought, which we do allow for, the Confession of Dositheus. Now, he says papal primacy, which it's not the papal primacy of the first millennium. Scholars admit to this. Every time Eric Bard made a doctrinal development argument in favor of Roman Catholicism amidst this, so no, But I will give him this. They have at least some sort of papal primacy because we don't have a Pope of Rome anymore. He's in schism. So I guess you have this mutation of papal primacy, if that means anything. They do have that. And purgatory, which, again, bizarre, because it's not a consensus view in the saints. And those who speak of purgation don't seem to have the later post-schism views of purgatory, particularly the treasury of merits, indulgences, the things that, again, I've had like around 45,000 views as Catholics, no responses. And that article on indulgence has been out for like 2 years now. No one's talking about it. Why? Because I brought the receipts, and it's clearly an accretion. It's not from the early church. Ben says, I can go to any Catholic parish in the world and find a pastor there who has a legitimate claim to possessing a divine mission to preach the gospel and minister the sacraments. I mean, we claim the same thing. I don't see how this is so exclusive. He continues, infallible teaching authority isn't just a thing of the past, but rather an active reality in the church. Again, without infallible councils, I just don't see how you could really make that sort of critique defense that he's making here. And so let me just find that comment here, if I could, in my notes. But in the end of the day, they don't have infallible interpretations of their infallible pronouncements. They don't have an infallible list of councils. I just don't see how this is very compelling. Like, is Amoris Laetitia, is it infallible or is it not? Is Vatican II, I even hear them say, is it infallible or is it not? Is allowance of blessing of homosexual couples, is it infallible or is it not? I've seen people say both ways. How do we interpret these things? What interpretation is correct? Is the interpretation of Amoris Laetitia and allowing people with Zika to use birth control, is that correct? I mean, your Pope said that. So, like, is it correct? Was he speaking infallibly? Was he not? I know you're going to say no. And so, but how about his interpretation? Is it correct or not? You're judging, the interpretation of the Pope of Amoris Laetitia of yourself. So I just don't see what we've really done here. Just like the Protestant who says, I got the Bible, I could answer the question. Well, yeah, the scriptures could answer these questions, but the person reading the scriptures isn't infallible. The person interpreting the Pope is not infallible. Positing an infallible authority doesn't fix anything. This is super obvious. What gives authority if we don't know what is infallible and how to interpret infallibly? I just don't see why it's something to boast about. Orthodox think it's infallible. Their church is infallible, right? So just positing infallible doesn't fix anything, in my opinion. At least we could point to a consensus of saints. A popularity contest of sorts. At least it's something. It's better than a definition of papal infallibility where no one is actually sure it applies, in my opinion. So at least a popularity vote, you could actually just put things next to each other and find that out, right? It's countable. All right, let's continue. Ben writes, even when papal infallibility is being pushed to its limits today, the intra-Catholic theological dialogue this is causing is developing our understanding of ecclesial authority in a way Eastern Orthodox Protestants can only dream of, maybe in a nightmare, but okay. Because we're not having these sort of problems in some respects, that's a good thing. It's kind of a strange critique. Believe it or not, theological development is a good and sometimes necessary thing, especially when you have your own messy post-schism history, including the present day, that needs to be explained. So we went from these Roman Catholic views are biblical and patristic to, but we have theological development to explain the messiness, which sounds to me is like they're not biblical and patristic. They need to theologically Newman it away, pretty much. Slap some Newman on it. So we kind of see already some contradictory thinking here. I won't use the term schizo against that. That's an actual medical diagnosis. It's very insulting that people that actually have schizophrenia. I know people with schizophrenia, and it's really a low IQ insult. It's like calling someone a retard, calling someone fat. It's not a serious critique. Christians should be calling people. It shouldn't be name calling. We need to be a little more like adults. Let's adult here. Let's do adulting, as they say today. He continues, the difference between Catholicism, Protestant, and Eastern Orthodoxy on the matter of theological development is that whereas the former's developments will have an actual impact on our teaching and credibility for all time, the latter's developments can and will be forgotten, discarded by the next generation without battling an eyelash. This is bizarre because we see that the Roman Catholic Church has forgotten some of the ideas that have been developed over time, like the theological clarifications during the first 7 ecumenical councils in anthropology, in my opinion, which is why the Mariology is so screwed up. We see other stuff like Orthodox had developments with theological terminology, energy, essence, distinction. We didn't forget them. We still use these things. I'd argue just anyone being honest, the Roman Catholic Church has forgotten how the first millennium used to do church, right? The idea that like the Pope couldn't do whatever he wanted, the fact that during Nicaea too, they asked for jurisdiction of Balkans, they don't get it. Not everyone presumed upon direct jurisdiction. It's an idea that didn't even exist at the time, right? So like, how do they forget this? This sounds like their theological developments existed and they forgot their past, right? So it's a critique that does not work. And so he pretty much ends this by saying, yes, everything is messed up in the Roman Catholic Church, but, I'm going to stick by, my church, right or wrong, essentially. And then he starts making these interesting side notes about atheism, right? Like, however, when you can actually start trying to make sense of an atheistic paradigm, when you get past the surface and see what's really there underlying the philosophy, it's completely incoherent. Atheists can't even account for why the world exists, much less why it exists, conscious beings, yada, 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 right? Only theism can do this. It's interesting because when Joshua Shupin apostatized, he didn't say, well, here's why I'm not an atheist, right? Like, it wasn't an option to him. He was going to believe in God still. But we could actually see that Ben is sort of at least justifying why he's not an atheist, okay? And I don't know Ben well enough on this. I haven't spoken to him about this question. But at the time, he was Orthodox anyway. I have personal friends that are Roman Catholic, right? Been to my house, okay? Vacation with these people, right? So know these people personally. More than one Roman Catholic has told me, and there's another famous Roman Catholic with a YouTube channel who I know through a friend. He told his friend the same thing. If there was no papacy, I couldn't be a Christian. I've heard more than one say. I heard one say, I couldn't believe in God. The other said, I'd be like a Platonist. What's this thing with Roman Catholics that if the papacy is not true, that they're going to give up on God, or they're going to give up on Jesus Christ, who is the true God, and become like theists, but not Christians anymore? It's bizarre that your faith in the papacy is so important that Christianity is just somehow debunked if there's no papacy. How could he even entertain this if you taste and see that the Lord is good in the Eucharist? How can it even be entertained? Now, of course, apart from the grace of God, all of us could apostatize. All of us could leave Christianity altogether, right? None of us are too good for that. We're all sinful people. My point in bringing this up is obviously the state of mind that Ben's in right now is this is a possibility that he must entertain. And it's a possibility I've seen Roman Catholics entertain. And that's very, very disappointing. We have to have a bigger God than that. All I can tell you is this. If you really entertain for a second, there's no Christian God because there's no papacy, guess what? You've already given up on God. Your God is the Pope, if you really seriously entertain that. You know, so it's, and we see Christian marriage saying, I've seen that a lot too, right? So yes, this is very common. It's way too common in Roman Catholicism. And like I said, I know people in the real world that this is really what has happened, that they really struggle with that. Now, he continues, and this could be kind of long, so I appreciate your patience. In much the same way, while Catholicism may seem absurd at face value, and alternatives seem more compelling, because they are, once you start trying to make one of those other systems, work, you come to realize that the looks are deceiving. Just as naturalism cannot give a coherent account for the world, so too are non-Catholic sects incapable of coherently maintaining the Christian faith, even though they often appear to at first glance. Protestantism may seem like it better accounts for our experience of a divided Christendom, but it cannot even account for its own existence, severing itself as it does from the historic church and historic hierarchy. Eastern Orthodox may outwardly appear more ancient and beautiful, but it cannot account for its own history, contradicting the very papal ecclesiology it constituted during the first millennium. Again, he's clearly not done his research. All right, I like how he used the word consent because now he just threw the ball in my side of the court. Read about a consent in this book, Ben. Seriously, I challenge you to read this book. You're a smart guy. You're trying to get a graduate degree. You will admit, because unless you're not honest, you'll admit this is a much more thoroughly researched book with way more resources than the Eric Ybarra book, right? So why don't you read it? Because you're going to find it wasn't consented to. It absolutely was not. We've got ecumenical councils where there's no consent to the. We had an ecumenical council held on the question in 879, 880, where it comes up in the first canons about it. It was not consented to during the first millennium. This is just not a true statement. To be fair, Ben reads a lot of secondary resources, and you already eat. If you don't spend a lot of time really diving into the primary sources, you're just going to just get into whatever secondary source, I guess, sings your tune better, I suppose. Again, I could write a book at the end of the day. My weakness as a writer, you might not like its tone or whatever. I think people need to read the primary sources, but if you can't, that's my book, and I hope it does help. Anyway, he continues, thus, even in the midst of horrifying scandal and seeming falsifications, Catholic Church alone stands as the heir of the Christian faith, and our Lord Jesus Christ's divine mission to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. That's why I'm Catholic, and that's why I'll remain Catholic. So there you go. That's his Lutheran moment. Here I stand, so help me God. And may God help Ben, right? I'd rather have him be a Roman Catholic than to be an atheist. So it's may he stay a Christian and may he return to the Orthodox Christian faith. This is your opportunity for questions and comments. So I'll start reading them. We have this one. Are you planning to write more books in the near future? And the answer is no. There is a manuscript that's done. It's a commentary in the Book of Job. And I actually did a really good episode of the Book of Job with Ben. So I have a whole commentary on the book, but I don't think I have more books in me, in all honesty. I think that is it from me. So thank you for your question. We have, should I remain Catholic while rejecting the filioque and accepting Papalism my main theology? I'd say no. I mean, we have this among the Uniates and stuff like that, but it's just become Orthodox, right? If they're wrong about that stuff, why would he be Roman Catholic? It's like saying, should I not believe heresies but remain a heretic? I don't know. I just would disagree with you. May God help you. We have this. Rocor really foresaw this. I think that the issue of abuse economia would have serious spiritual consequences. I believe that's why they had the 1971 synod requiring non-Orthodox to be baptized. And yes, and I do agree that the Orthodox are going in the wrong direction on these questions. The Jerusalem Patriarchate has gone in a more negative direction on these questions. the Greeks obviously have, whether in Alexandria and Greece. ROCOR has been liberalizing to a degree. I'll just keep it kind of vague. This is happening all around. But interestingly, some other churches have gone the opposite direction. Georgia, Bulgaria. And it could all change in New York minute. They could get a new patriarch. The synod could clean house. But it could also go the other way from these other jurisdictions. So if you read history, stuff has been worse, like in the 7th century, by the way. And also things go back and forth. So we can't lose our stuff every time something bad happens. But yes, we are definitely having issues with ecumenism. That's for sure. And with liberalism, within Orthodoxy. That's why I have a whole show on it. Is Orthodoxy a bigger mess than Roman Catholicism? I don't hide this stuff. I don't pretend it's not there. And to be fair, I don't make myself the judge of it. In the end of the day, I go to church. I don't expect my bishop to be perfect. I don't expect other bishops to be perfect. None of us are perfect. And historically, you just don't find it. So it's a kind of weird thing. I think it comes from pride. If you're really expecting for people or a denomination to be absolutely perfect at that moment when you're alive, right? At least like our idea of perfection is the consensus of the saints. But it's like, in the scriptures and things like that. The idea that everyone's gonna be perfect right at this moment, even a saint at every given moment is gonna be perfect, I just don't think is realistic with fallible human beings. I got here a little late, converting to Orthodoxy from Protestantism. Good for you, Steve. God bless you. Found every reason to stay Orthodox and no reason to leave. Main resistance to all the reading material in Orthodoxy. And yeah, I kind of don't like that in the Orthodox Church. Like, read this book. Read it. Everybody's like reading books. It's like, just go to liturgy, pray to the saints, fast, give your alms, just live a good life, be a good person, love Christ, love him in your heart. It's not all about books. I mean, I'm grateful if, a book like mine can help bring someone there. But at the end of the day, it's not going to keep you there. None of the books in the world are going to keep you there. If you feel like I got to read books, I'm going to apostatize, I'd say you got to start a marathon regiment of spiritual disciplines, because books aren't going to stop apostasy. In fact, they're going to cause it, because the issue is ultimately spiritual. We have this. Once you speak to a priest, he'll begin to guide you with prayer and catechism. That's a recommendation to our Protestant convert, Steve. We have also, which magisterium of Roman Catholicism, because they're not unified in dogma. For instance, the Eastern Catholics say Palmas, while the Latins say heretical. Who's right? So there we go. We have LOL. Roman Catholic Church is one responsible for the godless West, clears throat, funding of secular arts. And ultimately speaking, this sort of epistemology that with Protestantism that leads to atheism, right? It's a way of thinking you don't get from Orthodoxy. You get it from Orthodox countries having people with Western ideas they get from the West. It's kind of foreign from the Orthodox paradigm. We have this. I'd say that schism to the Reformation would lead to the development of atheism. All right. We got a few more. Question. What do you think the main reason that some intelligent Roman Catholics cannot see the papal system is wrong? 1, pride. This is Ortho Christos answer. 2, Roman Catholic tradition. 3, both of these 2 are others. Let me give a multi-tiered answer. All right. Why do people buy into the Roman Catholic system? Well, one of it's just ignorance, right? You find a quote mine and you don't read anything in context and you lack the ability to interpret history. So we can honestly come to that conclusion. People that also don't know how to read historical texts that aren't from their cultural background is a big thing. Like, I'll just use my wife as an example. She's an engineer. She's not a historian, doesn't know how to read history. And the questions she'll ask sometimes are very, very elementary. I can't begin to understand why she doesn't understand certain stuff, but she's just not trained in it. And she's also she's not even from the West. She's from Cambodia. And her understanding of theological questions is all in English and all from a Western understanding, right? And so the idea that you're going to grapple with intellectual things in history from another vantage point would be probably too much asked from someone who's not really a historian, which is why I already said, I really don't want people to become history experts. I mean, this channel is the channel for that if you want to get into it. But generally speaking, most people aren't cut for it. History is a discipline. Most apologists don't know anything really about it. That's why I sound like the only guy that ever talks about history as a discipline. So that is something that is where I think people just don't know how to read history so they can legitimately come to the conclusion. We have this, yes, a papist woman. I mean, yeah, that will make you a Roman Catholic or Orthodox girl. I became a Calvinist for my wife years ago. Women will do that. So that's a thing. I think there's a spiritual thing. I see this with Orthodox, where you start getting a tunnel vision. Everything about a pope matters. And you read a infallibility statement about a Roman emperor, you read something about not consenting to the pope, none of that matters. But if you find just one thing that sounds good about the pope, it matters. If you put down in Google, Orthodox people quote mine, I got a whole list of flowery statements about people that aren't popes. But for some reason, people struggling with papacy, they won't bat an eyelash at them. They just don't matter. Because it's spiritual, right? If the same thing written about a pope matters, but not about anyone else, why? Because the demons are tempting you with one thing. You're cooperating with the demonic energy with one thing and not the other. It's why, by the way, I think music from one era could stir the passions, and then in another era it just becomes classic music. I really, like jazz used to be considered terrible. It stirs the passions, and now I don't think it does, because there's spiritual energies. Read the canons. The canons talk about demonic energies, by the way. I'm not a nut about this. But I'll just leave it there because I'm also not an expert either. But I do think there's something spiritual going on. Okay. I honestly think, like, for myself, where I'm at, it's not a struggle for me whatsoever. It's just literally the Roman Catholic papacy is historically impossible. It's impossible. Anyone that's read the sources understands the sources. It's literally impossible. I don't have to have a crazy epistemology about development or something. I don't have to use word trickery to make something true. I don't have to take manuscripts, which are obviously falsified, and claim they're true. I don't have to do any of that stuff, because at the end of the day, I could just look at the actions of the early church as the test tube, which tests the words that are spoken, and I know exactly what happened. There was no Vatican I papacy in the first millennium. Beyond the shadow of doubt, it's morally certain. So it's, but again, I could have other spiritual issues, again, like pride. And to speak about myself, there's stuff where, like, I don't know what the right decision is in my life to do, how to work with people I love and stuff like that, not to get too overtly personal. So I'm not putting myself up there some paragon. I know everything and have clarity about everything. There's lots of stuff I don't have clarity about. But on the historical question, I'm very firm about this. I have no doubts about it. And I don't feel any sort of, thank God, apart from the grace of God, I'd be like Ben or like anyone else on this question. I don't feel any struggle about this. I'm not motivated by any personal struggle, which is why, I'm sort of done on the question. Wrote my book because there was no good book. Now there is. I don't need to write another book. It's done. All right, we have this. Do you have any advice on someone seeking a career with no college education? Is a mechanic good? Production in Toyota? Actually, I have a lot of opinions about it. Thank you for asking. Get into the trades. I personally think the perfect trade I want my son to get into is I want him to be like a lineman. You want to work with your hands, but it needs some brains. So if you're working as a lineman for the electric company, the government will collapse like Nazi Germany during World War II, but the next day the power is still on. So the government is less important than even the electric company. And the engineers, for example, National Grid, were almost forced to all get a vaccine they didn't want. You could guess which one. And only 25% of the linemen and mechanics got it. And guess what happened? Even against the mandate and everything, none of them were forced to do it because the power would go out tomorrow if you fired all the linemen because they refused to get a vaccine. They have the real power. I mean, look what happened in Canada when the truckers went on strike. They literally broke out the National Guards. They're like beating heads and stuff. The linemen have more power than them. And push comes to shove, they can ultimately command more money. And they command a lot of money today. And they will command more and more and more when people realize, when they realize their own power, pun intended. Right? So I'd recommend that, but anything that can't be outsourced ultimately, right? You learn to be a plumber, that toilet doesn't leave that room. You learn to be a lineman. That power line's not going anywhere. Tesla coils aren't going to happen. Come on, it's not command and conquer. Find something that can't be outsourced, that you need to work with your hands, and you need someone with a brain. That's what I would do if I were to do it all over again. And you'll find yourself probably becoming the finger pointer soon enough, telling the other guys what to do, and it'll be your own business. And get your own small business, be an LLC, pay yourself very little, keep the business savings in the business, pay little taxes. This is how you're going to survive in the future. And it's good for the family, I think, to do it that way. Tips for anyone flirting with true orthodoxy. Not to disappoint people, I'd of course say no. Don't do it. I know someone who's apostatized to true orthodoxy. He's a nice guy. I've become pretty cold with him in some degrees because I really disagree with it. It's kind of a purity spiral to steal a thing from Pints with Aquinas. But you're not going to find perfection. They got their own problems too. They charismatic people that baptize them. They do liberal stuff too and whatnot. That happens there. But I don't fault them for it. No one's perfect. I'm hoping to do a show where I'd actually bring Father Joseph Sweden and maybe Father John Whiteford on the question, because it's not as black and white as people think. There's people ROCOR to this day that think the true Orthodox have grace because they have their bishops through ROCOR and stuff like that. So I'm not going to come down to condemn them where people in my own church, my own bishops won't condemn the true Orthodox on that count. But I would ward against it because I'd say just do a spiritual assessment. What is tempting you to do it? Right? If the temptation is, but I'm seeing all these big problems here, well, you just don't know enough of their big problems yet. Right? Just be a grown-up and realize you're not going to find perfection anywhere when it comes to that. So that'd be my tips. I think it gets a lot tougher for those my church closed down. They refuse to commune anyone because of a disease. They refuse to let people worship because of disease. I just want to go where Orthodox still want to worship. How am I going to condemn that person? Right? I really can't condemn someone who's saying that. Of course, say it's better to do a reader service than to go into schism. But it's really hard to really condemn that person who actually wants to do what God asked them to do, on a personal level. I think they're wrong. I think, they put their soul into jeopardy. I think they should do reader services. That's what Father Daniel Sazoyev said, for example. So I'll repeat what he said on that question. But it's, like I said, there needs to be more understanding, because I think ultimately a lot of true Orthodox are going to re-enter the Orthodox fold, or the way they see it, we will re-enter their fold. Who cares? The point is, eventually, I think a large part of the schism will be healed. Not before it gets worse, before it gets better, by the way. I think there'll be, sadly, other schisms due to liberalism and whatnot. But that being said, that's why I don't see it as us versus them thing. I think there's still smoke. And we haven't seen everything that's going to happen with that yet. Someone asks us, is an associate's degree in finance worth it? I mean, maybe you're doing it part-time so you could do your own investments better in your own accounting. It doesn't hurt to have some information. And it depends what kind of learner you are, I think. I don't think most people really get that much from college. So you're just kind of wasting your time, But, that's on you at the end of the day. Right? Sometimes you just need the piece of paper because that is the prerequisite to get X job. So, but I sort of, lots of people go to college to study history like myself. Not everyone, I think, really understands how to do history. So it's, I'm not a huge believer in the university system. I'm not against it for some people. I just think people are overly educated. They're not cut for it. I have a video on this, by the way, the seminary system. I think we need a more hands-on seminary training than intellectual. I think the intellectual system is failing a lot of people. This comment, why don't Reformed Christians see Christological blunders of modernistic salvation and how it parallels the modern energist heresy of the 5th, 6th centuries? Because they don't study those councils. Even the Roman Catholics don't. I've had videos on this. I think a lot of Mariological issues on their end are anthropological because they don't understand the 6th council. When will you accept the Council 431 by heart? Again, that's Oriental Orthodox sort of trash talking. We accept that council. It's the one, you're the ones who don't. We have a good question. Well, here first is comment. Actions in history shout louder than words ultimately. And we have more words too, by the way. We just have both. They just have some words, by the way. So let's just point that out. How has your work with Colorati improved your research? It hasn't affected my methodology, but of course, John has improved my research for one, providing translations, double checking my translations, providing so many of his own translations. He's a phenomenal resource. So, I mean, how could he not? I think Roman Catholics need to use John Colorati more. I don't know why they don't. He's someone who's underappreciated. He's going to hate that I said this, so don't forward it to him, please. Probably good for his soul, ultimately, right? I think for me, I'd be lying if I didn't think I feel my work's underappreciated. It's probably good for me, so good. Hopefully people steal my ideas and do better stuff with it. So I don't get the appreciation, but then the ideas help people. That's really the best thing for me spiritually. Colorati is just, he's got a very plain head-on approach with stuff. He's not very interpretive, which makes him a great resource. If anything, I might be overly interpretive. Of course, I don't think so. I'm right, but if I critique myself, I could see that. Papist Maximus, love your enemies. You must love us and show this love by becoming a Catholic. With the rainbow behind them. Not sure if serious, as the meme says. But yes, love our enemies. I did a job at Toyota. Pick-pack at a warehouse 15 years ago. I hated it. Again, warehouse may be more unthinking. I'd say, again, learn a good trade. But yeah, another thing is I worked in the automotive field. Still sort of do, honestly. But the point is, you get treated like junk in the automotive field. They treat you like an animal. They work you like a pack animal. It's horrible. But that's changing in automotive. They're starting to pay crazy money in automotive because people are figuring out, like, I'm not going to work for free. When I owned the shop, I paid guys like worse than minimum wage. They had a salary and they worked like 60 hours a week. It was terrible. I'm just gonna say it's a terrible profession, automotive. Someone says jazz is terrible. You could guess which religion why is his opinion. I'm afraid of heights, then become a plumber. But I'm afraid of poo or whatever. Keep making excuses. Let's see. We have people. Look, Rome is perfect with the rainbow flag. Can't be serious. All right. It seems like they're just arguing each other. We have who is Ben Bollinger. He's a very nice young man. Ben Bollinger's a very nice young man who had a great Orthodox blog. He was very intelligent. I presume he still is. Very intelligent and insightful for someone his age, but he sadly has apostatized and really become kind of snarky, not so nice. I don't know why. My opinion is he feels personally betrayed by Orthodox who he thinks is wrong or lying to him, but he never said, you lied to me, like never allowed us to explain ourselves. So kind of bizarre. All right. We have, are you familiar with Michael Winger? No. Any avenues that interest you, which would generate an interesting discussion? I'd do biblical typology, especially Book of Job. Why not? Okay, that's my unpublished manuscript right now, which hopefully I sell enough copies of The Rise and Fall of the Papacy that they'll publish my manuscript on the Book of Job. That'd be great. Let's see if we got anything else. Let's say, don't go harrowing Ben. He's a good kid. All right. I hope I'm not doing that, Shining Diamond. So yeah, I'd agree. He's been really nice in the past. That's for sure. Someone says you just have to sort out whether you or Constantinople is first among equals. I guess that's between the papacy and ourselves. There's union. We have, let's see, anything else here. Funko Pope or whatever. Here we go. So what do I do in my situation, driving a truck over the road? How do I get baptized? Every week I'm in a different state. What should I do? I'm convinced the Orthodox Church is the true church. Help. Well, you would find a priest that wants to catechize you. Truckers have a house. They have a home. They usually are at least home for a little bit. And so just tell that priest, listen, I'm a trucker. Can I call you once a week or something? If you really can't pull that off, I don't know, leave a comment and maybe get you in touch with like a priest like Father John Whiteford or something. And they can work that out. And when you're trucking through, you could get baptized. But they want to get to know you. They need to know who they're dealing with. I would recommend when you do your furlough, that's the church you go to, is wherever you do your furlough. All right, may God help Arrow. Let's see. The personal speculation. So you think that one of the underlying reasons Ben left the church is because he did not find Orthodox intellectually satisfying enough? I mean, maybe. In the end, again, only Ben knows. But I remember thinking that as a Protestant, like, I realized that it's just the same old, like a broken record over and over, and it wasn't very challenging. And I remember telling an elder in the Protestant church I was in, I don't feel very challenged anymore by theology. And so you could say, oh, well, that motivated Craig then to become Orthodox, had to learn a whole new system. I mean, maybe. You can see God could put good motivations in people, right? There's all sorts of things God uses to save our souls. Ben is definitely a systematic thinker, and he tried systematizing Orthodoxy, I'd say, very successfully in points, right? And so it's almost like maybe he fell too much in love with systematizing, perhaps. You know, it's so anyway, who knows? Maybe. We have this. What's a good video or article resource for someone caught up on the essence energies distinction? I got a few good blog posts. If you put in Google Trulia energy essence, you'll get some stuff. I mean, more than that, read the tome of 1351. Just put down Palamas tome 1351, Maximulia, or G, or however you pronounce it, has the council. I think the council explains itself pretty simply. It's not very complicated. So I just read that. Go read the council. What do you think if you are a liberal jurisdiction but have a nice priest and parish family? Would you leave or stay? I would stay personally. The amount of sacrifices I have made for the sake of my family, and the parishes I've changed for the sake of my family, you got to family. It's essentially God first. Family is a very close second, and if you could get both, you swing both. Is my opinion. So yeah, until someone's in schism, I put the personal perfection nonsense at the door. You're not going to get perfection anyway. Let's see. Well, the story of St. Gregory praying Trajan to hell, how does that square with free will? Good question, Christian Mario. We got a nice one. Now, the Orthodox opinion is that there's no repentance after death. That's in 2 Clement. It's in, I forget which decree of the Confession, Dositheus. God can only work with after death what's already there in the human heart, right? So if Trajan got out of hell, there had to be some sort of Christian inclination in the heart before he died. We don't know what that was. We do know, because we have a letter from Trajan where he essentially said, you know, when you kill the Christians, only kill some of them, go easy on others. So he could have been less bad of a persecutor. So we know that from history, all right? We know from tradition he was prayed out of hell. So he must have had some sort of soft spot towards Christians. You know, it's not uncommon that a lot of these emperors had Christian wives or concubines. We don't know who could have convinced them of what before he died. And he just didn't have the guts to go all the way. So this is something where, long story short, if Trajan got out of hell, which he did according to tradition, it's because he had some sort of inclinations that God's grace could work with. What God can't do is take someone completely contrary to him and change their will. There has to be some sort of inclination he could work with. Okay? And a lot of this gets into, again, why I've done so much in Mariology and anthropology. If you understand those things, that's how the afterlife works. All right? God, eternity, theosis is co-energizing with God, co-willing with God, right? So you must be cooperating with God. So for him to go to heaven, he had to be something with his will that would allow him to receive those energies and cooperate with him, if you want a real theological answer. So yeah, maybe think for a while. Let me know what you think of it. There you go. It's a good question. It is a good question. Let's see. We have, why couldn't Trajan have desire to repent but have been unable to actualize repentance without any prayer? I mean, stuff like this is possible. We see in the Confession of Dositheus, says those who have repented but didn't bear fruits of repentance are prayed out of hell. Right? That's the answer Dositheus gives. That could happen to Trajan. Right? So it's really not too much. So let me give my plugs. This has blessed you. please go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Donations are way, 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 way down. Way down. We really need support. All right. In the Church of Cambodia, please donate. If this has blessed you, please go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Please pray for Ben and for me. Please pray that I know I can have a constructive dialogue with him again. I don't know why there's been a breakdown in talking, why he feels so betrayed. I really feel bad about that. Hope we could disagree, but be respectful about it. Also, again, if you're struggling to question the papacy, you need to get your spiritual house in order. If you really want a good book, there is mine, The Rise and Fall of the Papacy. Link is below to Amazon. You can get the ebook. You can get the physical book. I guarantee you it is the most in-depth and best book on the topic. I'm not going to pretend that it's going to be the easiest book to read. It's not that it has highfalutin language, but it's because it's the most dense and, again, informational and not a lot of pages. I challenge you not to think how you think you're going to think, but to actually think patristically. That's going to be challenging. So you want to think patristically, you want to understand what the first millennium church is like, Rise and Fall of the Papacy. So again, those are my plugs. Of course, donate to Jordanville, or a monastery that stayed open during COVID. And any other questions, please leave below. I'll end this stream as I end all of them by quoting Jesus Rock, fight to death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.